Hi friends. Welcome back, and thank you so much for being here with me today. If you are new to this channel, I am so glad you found your way here. We tell true stories on this channel, stories that matter, stories about real people, and stories that deserve more attention than they have received. We do this slowly, carefully, and with a lot of respect for the families and communities at the heart of each case. Today's case was brought to my attention through our community, and I want to say thank you for that, because this is exactly the kind of story that our community brings forward so well. A quiet case, a forgotten case, a case that never made the national headlines, but a case that involves a real human being who deserves to be remembered. Today, we are going to talk about Jesus Aguayo. Jesus was 17 years old when he disappeared from Roma, Texas, on May 31st, 2011. He has been missing for going on 14 years. He would be 30 years old today. His case remains open. No one has been charged. No one has been arrested. The car he was driving that night has never been confirmed found. And for 14 years, his family has been living inside the kind of silence that is almost impossible to describe. So today, we remember Jesus Aguayo. We look at what we know, we look at what remains unknown, and we ask, together, whether there is still someone out there who holds the key to bringing this family some answers. Let's take a breath. Let's slow down. And let's begin. Jesus Aguayo was born sometime around 1993 or 1994, making him 17 years old at the time of his disappearance in May of 2011. He was a young man of Hispanic and white/Caucasian heritage. The NamUs listing describes him as Hispanic/Latino and white/Caucasian. And he grew up in Roma, Texas, a small city that sits almost exactly on the southern edge of the United States, separated from Mexico by the slow curve of the Rio Grande River. Now, I want to pause here and acknowledge something openly. Jesus' NamUs profile contains no photograph. There is no image associated with his case. That fact alone tells you something about how quietly this case has existed in the public record. For a young man who grew up in the digital era, who would have been a teenager in 2011, right when social media was becoming a daily part of life for young people, the absence of a photograph is notable. It suggests that the case, from the beginning, may not have attracted significant investigative resources or media attention. And that is something we will come back to. What we do know about Jesus physically is this. He stood 5 feet and 8 inches tall. He weighed approximately 150 pounds. He had short black hair and brown eyes. By every description, he was a slender young man, just moving through that season of life where childhood and adulthood overlap. Now, because public records on Jesus are limited, I want to do something that I think is important and honest. I want to paint a picture of what life likely looked like for a 17-year-old growing up in Roma, Texas, in the early 2010s. Not speculation stated as fact, but context that helps us understand who Jesus Aguayo was and where he came from. Roma is a small city in Starr County, and it has one of the most fascinating and layered histories of any community along the Texas-Mexico border. It was founded in 1765. In the 19th century, it was a booming river port. Its historic district still contains some of the most architecturally significant buildings in all of South Texas. But by the time Jesus was growing up there in the 2000s, Roma was facing the economic realities that many small border communities face: a shrinking economic base, limited employment opportunities, and a poverty rate that remains among the highest in the state of Texas. Growing up in Roma means growing up bilingual, almost by default. It means growing up in a community where the border is not a distant concept. It is the end of your street. The Rio Grande is visible from the bluffs at the center of town. Across that river is Miguel Alemán, Tamaulipas, Roma's sister city. And for generations, people on both sides have moved back and forth across that border for family visits, shopping, school, church, and work. Cross-border life is not a political abstraction in Roma. It is simply life. For a teenager like Jesus, growing up in that environment would have meant navigating 2 languages, 2 cultures, and in many ways 2 worlds simultaneously. He likely had family or friends on both sides of the river. He likely knew the bridges and the crossing points the way someone in another town might know the local streets. We don't have confirmed information about Jesus's parents, his school, or the specific details of his daily life. If any of you watching knew Jesus, knew his family, or grew up in Roma during that time, I want you to know that your voice matters. Your memories of him matter. And if you have information about his disappearance, I want to encourage you to use the contact information we will share at the end of this video. What we do know is this. On the morning of May 31st, 2011, Jesus Aguayo was a 17-year-old in Roma, Texas. He had his whole life ahead of him. And before the day was over, he would be gone. May 31st, 2011. It was a Tuesday. School in Roma would have been out or nearly out for the summer. The end of May sits right at the threshold of summer break in South Texas, where the heat arrives early and stays long. For a 17-year-old, a Tuesday in late May would have felt like the beginning of something open and free. The long, unstructured days of summer. No particular place to be. What we know from the NamUs case file, the only official public record of Jesus' disappearance, is this. Jesus was last seen leaving his home on May 31st, 2011. That is the extent of the confirmed timeline. We do not have a confirmed time of departure. We do not have publicly available information about who last saw him leave, or whether any words were exchanged, whether there was a conversation, a plan, an argument, or simply a door closing behind a teenager who walked to a car. We know that when Jesus left, he was wearing blue jeans, a blue and white checkered shirt, and white sneakers. We know that he got into a white 2004 Dodge Neon sedan, bearing Texas license plate BL5F410. And we know that the NamUs case file notes, simply and chillingly, he may have traveled to Mexico. That phrase, he may have traveled to Mexico, is one of the most important lines in this entire story. It tells us that at the time the case was filed, investigators could not confirm whether Jesus crossed the border. They could not confirm that he didn't. It was, and remains, an open question. He may have been heading somewhere specific. He may have been crossing the bridge on the spur of the moment. He may never have made it to the bridge at all. Before the unthinkable would happen, before that white neon disappeared from the public record, someone watched Jesus Aguayo leave his home in Roma, Texas. And that someone may still be out there. That Tuesday in May is where the known story of Jesus Aguayo ends. Everything after that is silence. There is no crime scene associated with this case, at least, none that has been made public. No body was found. No crime scene was processed in the way you might expect if foul play had been immediately suspected. What we have, instead, is an absence. A void where a person used to be. Let me share what the official record contains. Missing person, Jesus Aguayo NamUs case number, MP14417 NCMEC case number, 1176698 date of last contact, May 31st, 2011 last known location, Roma, Texas, 78584, Starr County NamUs case created, April 3rd, 2012. That date is worth noting. The NamUs case was created April 3rd, 2012, nearly 10 months after Jesus disappeared. That gap is not unusual in all cases, and NamUs entries are sometimes created long after initial reports are filed with local agencies. But it does suggest that national-level attention to this case was not immediate. Physical description, at time of disappearance: hair, black, short eyes, brown height, 5 feet 8 inches weight, 150 pounds race/ethnicity, Hispanic/Latino, white/Caucasian. Clothing at time of disappearance: blue jeans, blue and white checkered shirt, white sneakers. Vehicle: 2004 Dodge Neon sedan, color white, state Texas, license plate BL5F410. There is no publicly available information about whether this vehicle was ever recovered. There is no confirmed report that the car was seen crossing any international bridge or checkpoint. There is no confirmed witness report placing Jesus at any location after he left his home. For 14 years, that white Dodge Neon and the young man inside it have remained unaccounted for. If you are watching this video and you have ever seen Jesus Aguayo, if you encountered him in 2011, if you knew him, if you heard something about a young man in a white Dodge Neon around that time, please listen carefully to this description. At the time of his disappearance, Jesus Aguayo was 17 years old, 5 feet and 8 inches tall, approximately 150 pounds. A slender young man with short black hair and brown eyes, of Hispanic and white/Caucasian descent. He was last seen wearing a blue and white checkered shirt, blue jeans, and white sneakers. He was driving a white 2004 Dodge Neon sedan with Texas license plate BL5F410. His last known location was his home in Roma, Texas, in Starr County. He may have been traveling toward the U.S.-Mexico border. He would now be approximately 30 years old. If he is alive, he would be a man in his early 30s. Age-progressed imagery, if it exists, has not been made widely public in this case. If you have any information about Jesus Aguayo, his whereabouts, or the circumstances of his disappearance, please contact the Starr County Sheriff's Office or submit a tip through the NamUs system at namus.nij.ojp.gov, case number MP14417. I want to be transparent with you, as I always try to be on this channel. The publicly available information about the investigation into Jesus Aguayo's disappearance is extremely limited. What we know is this: a missing person report was filed. This is confirmed by the existence of both a NamUs entry and a National Center for Missing and Exploited Children case number. These are two of the primary federal databases for missing persons in the United States, and the fact that Jesus is listed in both tells us that at minimum, someone, a family member, an advocate, an investigator, took steps to get his case into the national record. The NamUs case was created in April of 2012, approximately 10 months after his disappearance. The NCMEC case number, 1176698, indicates that the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children also has a record of this case. The investigating agency listed in the NamUs file is the Starr County Sheriff's Office, which would be the primary law enforcement agency with jurisdiction in Roma, Texas. Beyond these data points, we have very little. There are no news articles from 2011 that I could locate covering Jesus's disappearance. There was no apparent public appeal, no press conference, no flyers that have survived into the searchable internet. This is not uncommon for missing persons cases in border communities, where law enforcement resources are stretched, where some cases fall through jurisdictional cracks, and where families, especially families without financial resources or media connections, can struggle to keep cases visible. One of the most significant investigative complications in Jesus's case is the Mexico question. The NamUs entry includes a note that he may have traveled to Mexico. If Jesus crossed the border, whether voluntarily or under some form of coercion, the case immediately becomes an international missing persons matter. And that distinction matters enormously. A missing teenager in Starr County, Texas, is investigated by the Starr County Sheriff's Office. A missing teenager who crossed into Tamaulipas, Mexico in 2011 falls into a jurisdictional gray zone that is genuinely difficult to navigate. U.S. law enforcement has extremely limited authority to investigate cases on Mexican soil. Coordination between U.S. and Mexican authorities, while possible, requires significant resources, relationships, and political will. And in 2011, the region of Tamaulipas directly across the river from Roma was, to put it plainly, extremely dangerous. We'll talk more about that in a moment. What we can say about the investigation is this: it exists, technically, in the national record. Jesus Aguayo is not forgotten by the systems designed to track missing persons. But the trail appears to have gone cold very quickly, and it has remained cold for 14 years. To understand what may have happened to Jesus Aguayo, you need to understand what was happening in and around Roma, Texas in May of 2011. And I want to be careful here. I am not going to sensationalize this, and I am not going to use the border context to paint Jesus or his family or his community in any kind of negative light. What I am going to do is give you the factual reality that shaped the world Jesus was living in. Roma, Texas is a city of roughly 10,000 people in Starr County, one of the poorest counties in the United States. It sits directly on the Rio Grande River. Across the river is Miguel Alemán, in the Mexican state of Tamaulipas. The two cities are connected by an international bridge, and cross-border movement has been part of daily life in this community for generations. In 2011, however, Tamaulipas was in the middle of one of the most violent periods in its recent history. The year 2010 had seen the collapse of the alliance between the Gulf Cartel and their former enforcer wing, Los Zetas. What followed was a brutal, sustained conflict between the two organizations for control of smuggling routes through Tamaulipas, including the routes directly across from Starr County. Cities like Miguel Alemán, Camargo, and Nuevo Laredo became active conflict zones. The drug war in that region included daily gun battles, acts of arson, kidnappings, and murders. Hundreds, some say thousands, of people fled when hellish fighting between the Gulf Cartel and the Zetas tore the town of Ciudad Mayor apart in November 2010. By May 2011, when Jesus Aguayo disappeared, this violence was not abstract news. It was happening across the river. It was visible from Roma's bluffs on a bad night. And it was the backdrop against which any young person in Roma was navigating their daily life. Roma has been described by Customs and Border Patrol officials as an area of significant cartel activity, with the Gulf Cartel controlling much of the illegal activity crossing the border in the area. Now, and this is important, the presence of cartel activity in a community does not mean that every resident is involved in it. Most people in Roma, Texas in 2011 were simply living their lives, going to work, taking care of their families, sending their kids to school. The cartel reality was background noise for most families, even as it was a very real and very present danger. But for a 17-year-old who may have been heading toward the border that evening, voluntarily or otherwise, the environment on the other side of that bridge in May 2011 was one of the most dangerous environments in North America. That context matters. It matters for the theories. It matters for the investigation. And it matters for understanding why this case may have gone cold as quickly as it did. Friends, I want to approach this section with the care that it deserves. Jesus Aguayo's family has been waiting 14 years for answers. I am not going to throw out accusations or point fingers. What I am going to do is walk you through the main possibilities that investigators and researchers have considered in cases like this, and let you think through them alongside me. These are possibilities, not accusations. Theory 1. Voluntary departure, runaway, or personal journey. The first, and, in many ways, the simplest possibility is that Jesus left voluntarily. He was 17. He may have had reasons, personal, emotional, relational, that we are not aware of. He may have been experiencing conflict at home. He may have had a destination in mind across the border, a friend, a relative, a connection we don't know about. He may have made a spur-of-the-moment decision that a teenager in crisis sometimes makes. The complication with this theory is not the departure. Young people do leave. What complicates this theory is the duration. 14 years of absolute silence. No contact with family. No social media presence. No confirmed sighting anywhere. Even teenagers who run away typically resurface, even years later. If Jesus left voluntarily and is alive, he has gone to considerable lengths to stay completely disconnected from anyone who knew him. That is possible, but it raises its own difficult questions. Theory 2. Foul play before or near the border. The second possibility is that something happened to Jesus before he ever had the chance to make a decision about crossing. Roma, Texas in 2011, while not a city at war, existed in close proximity to active criminal networks. A young man alone in a car at night, near the border, was potentially vulnerable in ways that are difficult to overstate. Carjackings occurred in border communities. Situations involving smuggling recruitment, where young men are approached, pressured, or coerced into carrying drugs or people across the border, were documented in this region during this period. If Jesus encountered the wrong people on the road that night, things could have gone wrong very quickly and very badly. This theory is difficult because it requires imagining something terrible, but it is the theory that would explain both his disappearance and the absence of any trace, because the networks involved in this kind of violence are specifically designed to make things disappear. Theory 3. Crossed into Mexico and did not return. The third possibility is the one the NamUs file hints at directly. Jesus crossed into Mexico that night, and something happened to him on the other side of the border. If he crossed voluntarily, he may have been meeting someone in Miguel Alemán, which, in 2011, was an extremely dangerous city due to the ongoing cartel conflict. Even if Jesus arrived with completely innocent intentions, the environment he was walking into was not safe. If he crossed under some form of coercion, if he was recruited or pressured in the hours before he left home, or encountered at the crossing, then what happened next could have unfolded very quickly. Disappearances in Mexican border cities during this period were tragically common, often went uninvestigated, and frequently left no trace that crossed back into U.S. records. This theory would also explain the investigative dead ends. If Jesus disappeared in Tamaulipas in 2011, finding him, or finding answers about what happened to him, would have required a level of cross-border cooperation that was, in reality, extremely difficult to achieve. Theory 4. He is alive somewhere, unreachable. The fourth and most hopeful possibility, the one families cling to through years of uncertainty, is that Jesus Aguayo is alive. That for reasons we cannot know, he has been unable or unwilling to make contact. That he built a life somewhere, maybe under difficult circumstances, maybe out of reach of the people who love him. Cold cases do break. People who have been gone for decades do reappear. Identities do get untangled. And DNA databases like NamUs exist specifically for the moment when an unidentified person's sample matches a family reference. This theory asks the hardest question of all, not what happened to Jesus, but whether, after all this time, he is still somewhere in the world. I hope so. Jesus Aguayo is not alone in this kind of silence. Along the Texas-Mexico border, particularly in Starr County and the surrounding counties of the Rio Grande Valley, there is a pattern of missing persons cases that receive limited public attention, limited investigative resources, and limited resolution. This is not a local failure in isolation. It reflects a set of systemic realities that are important to understand. Jurisdictional complexity. When a missing person may have crossed an international border, two sovereign nations are theoretically involved. But in practice, the coordination required to investigate a missing persons case across the U.S.-Mexico border in 2011 was extremely difficult. Mexican authorities had their own crisis to manage. U.S. authorities had limited reach. And the families in the middle had to navigate a bureaucratic gap that, in many cases, produced nothing. Fear is a silencer. In communities with significant cartel presence, witnesses are often unwilling to come forward, not because they don't know things, but because they are afraid. The consequences of talking, in some environments, are severe. This means that cases that might have been solved in other communities remain cold because the people with information have no safe way to share it. Record-keeping gaps. In 2011, surveillance technology along the border was not what it is today. The international bridges between Roma and Miguel Alemán had some monitoring capacity, but comprehensive vehicle tracking, facial recognition, and the kind of integrated surveillance systems we now take for granted did not exist in the same way. A white Dodge Neon could, in theory, cross a bridge and disappear into the Mexican night without a definitive digital record. Community invisibility. Cases involving young people of color from economically marginalized border communities have historically received far less media attention than cases involving other demographics. That is a documented reality. It is uncomfortable to say out loud, but it is true. And it matters. Because media attention drives tips. Tips drive investigations. And investigations drive resolution. Jesus Aguayo's case has no news articles, no television segments, no viral social media presence. It has a NamUs number and a line in a federal database. For 14 years, that has been the extent of his public record. That is what we are trying to change today. As of today, March 2026, Jesus Aguayo remains officially listed as a missing person. His NamUs case, number MP14417, is still active. His NCMEC case, number 1176698, is still listed. His last known location remains Roma, Texas. The last confirmed date of any contact is May 31, 2011. The white 2004 Dodge Neon with Texas plate BL5F410 has not been confirmed recovered in any public record. No arrest has been made. No charges have been filed. No confirmed explanation for his disappearance has ever been made public. He would be 30 years old today. Cold cases do break. The NamUs system specifically exists to cross-reference unidentified remains, including DNA from unidentified deceased individuals, against the family reference samples of missing persons. If Jesus's family has provided a DNA reference sample, it is possible that a future forensic match could bring answers, even in the absence of a traditional investigation. If you are a family member of Jesus Aguayo and you have not yet provided a DNA reference sample to NamUs, I want to encourage you, gently, and with the full understanding that this is deeply personal, to consider doing so. NamUs forensic services are available at no cost to families. And if you are a law enforcement professional, a researcher, or someone with knowledge of this case, please consider whether there is more that can be done. Cases like this can be re-examined. Evidence can be reanalyzed. Witnesses change circumstances. People who were afraid to talk in 2011 may not be afraid today. I want to close today by thinking about the people who have been waiting for 14 years. We don't know who Jesus' parents are. We don't know if he had siblings. We don't know the names of his friends, the name of his school, the details of his daily life. The public record is almost entirely silent on those things. But we know that somewhere in this world, there are people who remember a 17-year-old with short black hair, brown eyes, and white sneakers. People who remember the last time they saw him walk out a door. People who have spent 14 May 31 STS marking the anniversary of a silence they were never prepared for. What families of the missing describe is often called ambiguous loss, a form of grief that has no endpoint. Grief has a shape. It has a trajectory. It has, eventually, something to hold on to. But ambiguous loss, the not knowing, the waiting, the wondering, the 10,000 half-formed hopes, has no shape at all. It just keeps going. If Jesus is out there, wherever he is, I hope he knows that someone is still saying his name. And if someone watching this knows something, anything, please, use that information. It costs you very little to make a call. It could mean everything to a family. To report information about Jesus Aguayo. Small Blue Diamond, Starr County Sheriff's Office, 956-487-5551. Small Blue Diamond NamUs case. MP14417. NamUs NIJ.OJP.gov. Small Blue Diamond NCMEC case. 117-6698. MissingKids.org. Small Blue Diamond. You may also submit an anonymous tip via your local FBI field office. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. This case deserved to be told, and you choosing to listen to it, to sit with it, matters. Every view, every share, every person who now knows the name Jesus Aguayo is one more thread in the net that might, someday, catch an answer. If this video helped you learn something, if it moved you, please consider sharing it. Not for the numbers, but because somewhere, maybe in Roma, maybe across the border, maybe somewhere none of us would expect, there is someone who knows what happened to a 17-year-old boy in a white Dodge Neon on a Tuesday evening in May 2011. And they might see this video. That is not a small thing. Please take care of yourselves out there. Look out for the people around you. Trust your instincts. And if you ever feel like something is wrong, for yourself or for someone you love, say something. Do something. Don't wait. I'll see you next time. Jesus Aguayo, age 17 at Disappearance. Roma, Texas. May 31st, 2011. Still missing. Still worth searching for.